and they gave us guidance, which is rare for the SEC, but the SEC actually gave us guidance in the rule itself that said that it would be perfectly fine to rely on this integration rule if you start an offering under a 506B and then you transition over to a 506C. Again, as long as you're complying fully with those two. So let's get right into it. I mean, the main rule that I came across actually back in 2000. This was November of 2020, so about a year and a half ago. I saw this proposed rule which talked about literally pivoting from a 506B to a 506C mid syndication, mid raise, and I was shocked. I mean, I read it and I'm like, what? Like this can't be true. I mean, it's such an amazing thing that would be able to do, because it would literally allow us to start a syndication, take some non-accrediteds and pivot full stop. The issue was, this was November, so it was right before Christmas, so I didn't really have time to do a deep dive. And the proposed rule came out in November, and then the final rule actually became valid March 15th of last year. So it hasn't been quite a year since it's been around. But that's when I really did a deep dive into it. Once the final rule came out, I dug into it. The rule itself is eternal. I think it's 600-700 pages. I'm going to show you the relevant pages of that rule so you can go back and check and cross-reference and show it to your attorneys or whatever you want to do. I'm happy to do that. But essentially what the rule said was, usually, let me just backtrack a bit. Usually you cannot start a deal with one exemption and then go to another one, because the issue we're going to have is what this issue of integration, right? So I don't usually talk about integration. It's a little bit technical, but essentially it's the idea that if you have two different offerings that are essentially the same or very similar, and you're just kind of trying to get around the rule, that even though you're calling them two separate syndications, the SEC is actually going to combine them into one, and they're going to integrate those two offerings. So you can't just start a syndication, a 506B, run up to, let's say, 35 non-accredited investors and say, well, I'm out of my 35, or I've hit my limit. Let me just shut this one down, start another fund or another LLC, and magically I start again from scratch. I mean, the SEC is not going to go with that. They're going to integrate those. And so for the longest time, we couldn't combine two offerings. There was a safe harbor that was 6 months. So theoretically, you could start one offering, and if you waited 6 months before starting the other offerings, then that was a safe harbor, and the SEC wouldn't integrate those either. But what happened in this rule of March of 2020 is they completely revamped the integration rule. So they threw out all this 5-prong test that they had that nobody understood and it was really worthless. And what they did is they came up with some pretty simple prongs and several safe harbors. And safe harbors just means, if you can comply with the rule, then you're sort of assured of complying with their integration laws, and we don't have to go through some standards that nobody understands. Let me just mute everybody here. And so, sorry, mute all. And so what this rule says, and I'll go through the rule first, and then I'll go and show you where it is, but it's actually interesting the way it came through. So essentially what it's saying is that if you start a syndication under a 506B, right? And remember, under 506B, there's no advertising, there's no general solicitation. You can take a limited number of non-accredited investors, that's up to 35, as long as they're sophisticated. And generally speaking, you have to have what we call the pre-existing substantive relationship. I mean, the whole point of a 506B is it's people that you already know that are in your network. You're not out there advertising. So this rule says if you start your syndication under a 506B, comply fully with 506B. So no advertising, everybody has a pre-existing relationship, or maybe there's a referral in there, but generally a pre-existing substantive relationship. And then you terminate that offering and you start a new offering, same deal, but technically a new offering under 506C. And then from that point forward, you comply fully with 506C, meaning you can advertise, but you limit yourself only to accredited investors, and more so, you take reasonable steps to verify the accreditation status. Then the SEC will not actually integrate those two offerings. It's a 506B, you stopped it. 506C, you comply fully with those two. Kind of, I put this proverbial Chinese wall in between. And as long as you're doing that, they're not going to integrate those in the same, even if it's the same deal, even if you're using substantially the same documentation, the same share, the same price, like everything else is identical, other than the exemption that you're using. And so obviously when I read that, that was super exciting. What was fascinating about this rule, and I think this is what really made it useful for us, is that when you come out with when the SEC comes out with a rule, that's usually in the form of a proposed rule, right? So they come up with this, it's still 600 pages or whatever, but it's a proposal, and what they're looking for is for comments to come back from the public. So here's our idea. We want to do this rule. And so this is what they said on this one. We want to do a 506B, pivot to a 506C. That's the proposal. What do you guys think? And all these comments pour in from, anybody that's, got a stake in the game. So attorneys or regulators or syndicators or limited partners or whatever can comment. And one of the commentators actually came out and said, you know what, this integration rule is interesting that you're coming up with, but it'd be really nice if you could extend that and allow us to start with the 506B and then transition into a 506C with the same documents. That would be really helpful for us syndicators. And of course, I'm reading that and I'm saying, well, yeah, that would be awesome. And then somebody else commented in response to that saying, well, that's a terrible idea. That's basically just allowing people to advertise a 506B deal. I think that's a terrible idea. And so those are kind of the opposing views that were kind of highlighted in the proposed rule. And what ended up happening is that the SEC finally passed the proposed rule pretty much in the way they had submitted, and specifically addressed, and this is the key, and I'm going to show it to you, but they specifically addressed the comments back and forth about specifically doing a B to a C. And they gave us guidance, which is rare for the SEC, but the SEC actually gave us guidance in the rule itself that said that it would be perfectly fine to rely on this integration rule if you start an offering under a 506B and then you transition over to a 506C. Again, as long as you're complying fully with those two. So I'm going to share my screen. Again, don't get used to this, guys. I'm a flip chart guy, and I rarely use PowerPoint, let alone on this one. So this is probably the only time I'm going to use a PowerPoint, but I'm going to go through 3 slides. It's a little bit dense because it is statutes and rules, but I want to, again, just want to make sure that I'm showing you guys the source, because, I know you guys are going to go back to, which you should go back to your attorneys, and they're going to, ask you, where the source is, and I want you to be able to do that. So I'm going to share my screen real quick, and we're going to go through essentially what I just said, but I'm going to show it to you from the rule itself. And then I'm going to wrap it up with sort of best practices, sort of things that we've come up here at the firm of things that we think are a good idea when you're doing this. Obviously, it's a brand new rule. There isn't that much guidance, after this. And so we've kind of just come up with this on our own, but I think it makes sense. And I'll share those with you guys. Man, I can't believe there's so many of you guys in here. Who wants to listen to an attorney on a Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday evening? So anyway, I appreciate you guys. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen, and I can't really see the chat. So hopefully it's just that you can all see this. So I'm going to presume that you guys can see it. So this is the actual statute on the integration rule. And so technically the statute itself is 17 CFR 230.152, but we're going to know it as Rule 152. And this is specifically subsection B, which has, I think, 4 safe harbors, and specifically number 4 is the one that we're going to address. And so let me read it to you real quick, and then I'll translate it, because that's my gift, right? Taking these ridiculous things and making them easy to understand. So anyway, this is the integration rule. So they're not going to integrate any of these safe harbors in a situation where you have an offer and sale made in reliance on an exemption for which general solicitation is permitted. So that would be a 506C. Offers and sales made in reliance on an exemption for which general solicitation is permitted will not be integrated if made subsequent to any terminated or completed offering. So in other words, if you've got an offering that's been completed, terminated, and then you subsequently make an offer that relies on an exemption that has general solicitation, then the SEC will not integrate those 2 offerings. That's sort of the general, not the general rule, that's sort of the statute and the language of the statute. Oops. Here is the, This is just the cover sheet. It just tells to show you that it's March of 15th, and this is the actual rule. And again, this rule is, I forget if it's 600-700 pages. It's obscenely long, and it covers quite a few things in addition to just this rule. But specifically on section D, which is where they're talking about the specific issue under 152B4. These are the comments we talked about. Again, they kind of give us what the comments are, and so I'm just going to read it. I just thought this was, maybe it's just me as an attorney. I thought this was just kind of a funny back and forth with the commentators, and then we'll see the final guidance from the SEC. But another commentator recommended, so the rule was just we're going to integrate these things, and the commentator recommended an additional safe harbor providing that any offering commenced in reliance on an exemption that does not permit general solicitation, like a 506B, may be continued in reliance on an exemption that does permit general solicitation, like a 506E. According to this commentator, such a safe harbor would be particularly beneficial to issuers or syndicators commencing an offering in reliance with 506B and desiring to continue in its reliance on 506C, and would permit the issuer to use the same or substantially identical materials to continue. I can't even see that anymore. Sorry. Continue the, I can't see the top there. Let me move this over here. Move you guys out of the way. Continue. Well, I think that was it. Sorry, guys, technical difficulties. It shows to continue the offering in reliance of 506C. So again, this guy said this would be really nice if you guys took the extra step and made it very clear that we could start with a 506B, continue under 506C, and essentially use the exact same or very similarly identical materials, which we'll talk about in a second. And then, of course, somebody else came around and said, well, that sounds like a terrible idea. In contrast, one commentator opposing the safe harbor and proposed in this Rule 152B suggested that permitting a 506C offering to commence immediately following the completion of a 506B would be basically essentially the same as permitting general solicitation in a 506B offering conducted in 2 phases. So this is kind of, according to this commentator, was a way to kind of get around the rules. He didn't think it was a very good idea. And so he was taking the opposite position of the first one. And so again, these are a bunch of, there was, I don't know how many, there's 172 footnotes. So there might've been 172 comments, but the SEC finally agreed that they were going to pass the amendment as is. But then here's the kicker. This is probably the most important part. And so it specifically addressed this commentator and said, look, in response to this commentator's request, we are providing guidance with respect to an issuer, which is the syndicator, with respect to an issuer's ability to rely on this particular integration rule, with respect to offerings that were commenced in reliance on an exemption that does not permit general solicitation, but that the issuer wishes to continue in reliance on an exemption that does permit general solicitation. We are the view that the issuer may rely on this safe harbor if, for example, the issuer commences an offering under 506B and thereafter engages in general solicitation in reliance on 506C, so long as once the issuer engages in the solicitation, it relies on Rule 506C for all subsequent sales, thereby effectively terminating the Rule 506B offering, including by selling exclusively to accredited investors and taking reasonable steps to verify their accreditation status. Oops. I got to figure out how to get this. My apologies. I am excited, actually. I'm having a hard time reading this because it's in my way. Sorry, guys. You guys can probably read it. I can't, but it's important enough that I want to actually, let me just move this up here. No, that's not going to work. There we go. Including by selling exclusively to accredited investors and taking reasonable steps to verify the accredited investor status of each purchaser, the use of general solicitation in reliance on Rule 506 will not affect the exempt status of the prior offering and sales of the securities made in reliance with 506C. It is also not necessary for the issuer to use different offering materials for offerings that rely on different exemptions, so long as the issuer satisfies the disclosure and other requirements for each applicable exemption, meaning they really want to make sure that you are complying when you're doing the 506B. You're super strict and relying on 506B, as you should be anyway. No advertising, no general solicitation, having a pre-existing substantive relationship. And then when you switch over to C, you're fully complying with 506C, accrediteds only, taking reasonable steps to verify, and then obviously having the ability to advertise and generally solicit. So this is just kind of a cute thing that I wanted to share. But let me talk about best practices. So that's kind of the rule. So how do we actually implement this? And hopefully you guys were able to see that. Make sure the comments, great slice. Thank you. So that's the rule. That's, when I read that, like I said, I was shocked. I was happy, but shocked, but I think it's just great news for all syndicators. And this is really probably the best example would be if you're in a situation where, obviously you want to do a 506C, but you've got investors already that have invested in your prior deals that are non-accredited. So this would be a scenario where you could start that 506B, get your non-accrediteds that you've worked with before, have a pre-existing relationship with, and then at some point terminate that offering and start a new one under 506C. And then from that point forward, comply fully with all of them. Wanted to talk about some best practices. And again, this is just kind of stuff that our firm has put together. We just think it's smart. Is it required by the rule? No, I don't think so. I mean, the rule's pretty basic. All we have is the rule. We don't have any additional guidance since it came out. At least I haven't seen any. I keep looking for it. But one of the things we recommend when you're doing this, oh, look, at people are raising their hands. Jeff, I see that. I'll get you in a second, Jeff. One of the things we highly recommend is that we issue, just make sure we're muting all here. One of the things that we highly recommend is, first of all, making this decision at the beginning, right? So when you're starting your offering, when you're starting your syndication, that's when you want to figure out, look, I'm going to start raising under a 506B, and then I want to pivot. So we want to make that disclosure ahead of time for all of your 506B guys. We want to make sure, and gals, we want to make sure that's there. I like to suggest that you actually create separate classes of membership for each offering. So even though it's the same LLC, it's the same deal, I like to create sort of class A, let's call it class A1, and that's going to be our 506B offering, and then class A2 will be our 506C offering. That way, when you're out there advertising under 506C, you're specifically selling, you're specifically offering the class of shares that is for the 506B. And so it just takes away all the confusion that, well, are you really advertising the same shares that's under 506B? We really want to keep everything separate. And so I think having separate classes of shares just makes it a lot easier for you to be showing that, look, when I advertise, I had already terminated my 506B offering, and we went into 506C. So that's probably our first best practice. Once you make that decision, because obviously, at some point you started your raise, you're raising capital. At some point, you're going to make that pivot. Once you make that decision, you've got to go all in on that decision. So let's just say today, today's February 16th. So let's say I've been raising capital for a couple of weeks, and then today I said, you know what, I want to pivot. Then today's the day. February 16th is the day that I know I ceased and terminated my 506B offering. There's no lingering documents. There's no emails that are stuck in route or people have mailed you the offering documents. You are no longer accepting documents. You are no longer accepting dollars. You're not accepting anything. You have terminated that 506B offering and then pivoting. I like to actually recommend having a written consent, some kind of corporate resolution that we would prepare so that we have a meeting of all the managers or board of directors, and we sign a document that says, hey, on February 16th, we decided to terminate our 506B offering, and we're continuing under a new exemption, 506C. And then obviously from that point forward, we want to make sure that we're complying fully with 506C, which means, more importantly, not only accredited, but the verification. And by the way, just as a side note, everybody should be using an accreditation, a verification accreditation company, whether that's, I don't even want to name anybody, I don't have a dog in the fight, but that's not something I would be doing on my own. And so just make sure that when you're doing the 506C, you're using some kind of a verification company. And then what we also like to do, which I think is obvious, but we actually file two different Form Ds, because again, these are two separate offerings. They might be the same deal, they might be the same LLC, but you're selling two types of offerings or securities pursuant to two types of two types of exemptions. So we would file a Form D once you terminate, February 16th, within 15 days of any sale that happens on the 506B side, we would file a Form D. And then same thing once we switch over to 506C, within 15 days of the first sale of 506C, we'd file a Form D over there as well. And so I think that's it from best practices. We'll probably add to those as more and more stuff comes forward, but I think that's it in a nutshell. Again, we've had, not a ton, probably 3 or 4 clients that have taken advantage of this. And I think, again, it's really where it's appropriate or where it makes the most sense is if you've always wanted to transition or start doing 506C deals, but you have a database or you have investors and you don't want to leave them out, then this might be an option for you. What you cannot do, and maybe I'll preempt a question, I don't know if I saw it or not, but somebody asked me before this call, is once you've started an offering and you're already doing a 506C, you can't go the other way around, right? You can't start an offering under 506C and then terminate it and then do a 506B. First of all, the rule is very clear that the solicitation offering has to be subsequent to the first one. But at that point, you're just raising capital, grabbing non-accredited and putting them in. That you cannot do. I was very clear on the post earlier today that we're not saying that you can go advertise to non-accredited investors. What we're saying is you can advertise on a deal that contains non-accrediteds because they were in before that particular offering pursuant to a 506B. All right. Hopefully that made sense. I don't know if that was just confusing as can be. or not, but I'm going to go, since I have no assistant helping me. Hey, AJ, how you doing? I'm doing great. Thanks, buddy. Hey, Tammy, John, glad for your feedback. Honesty, guys, 72 people on this thing. I'm super excited, super humbled. Do we get a t-shirt for being among the first group? Maybe. I need to get some swag. I'm not there yet, but hey, Shark. Okay, Tony, how you doing? Can see you. Perfect, Jim. All right. All right. What qualifies as a stop? This is from Palmy Kitty. What qualifies as a stop the 506B offering? That is when you actually stop and seize all efforts in that 506. So no more offering, no more talking to people about that 506B offering. Again, I like to document that. Probably you wrote that before I said it, but I like to document it with a corporate resolution. So you're not only making a statement, but a statement in and of itself isn't good enough. Just because you say today is the day that I'm going to stop my 506B deal, but then a week later, there's another offering document that, you know, somebody was delaying and decided to send it to you later. You can't accept that. You're no longer, you've terminated the offering. It's over. There's no more room for that particular thing. So if somebody comes in, even the day after that resolution, I would not take that money. So once you make the decision, make sure that all the money's in, all the documents are in, that there's nobody else floating out there before you make that actual stop. I think hopefully that answered that question. Mauricio, can you bring non-accredited investors along into the new 506C syndication? No. So great question. So the question is, can you bring non-accredited investors along into the new, oh, when you say bring along, if you're talking about the non-accredited investors that were already in there pursuant to 506B, the answer is yes. What you cannot do is bring, once you start the 506C offering and you start advertising, again, we've got to comply fully with the 506C rules and regulations, which would allow you to advertise, but you would be limited to only accredited investors, and you must take reasonable steps to verify that those investors are accredited. So I guess I answered both of those questions either way, but what's very clear, and even though there's been a lot of updates from the SEC, is you can never, ever have even if they're completely separate deals, you don't want to be having a 506C deal out there where you're generally soliciting and then somebody comes in and they happen to be non-accredited, which is going to happen because when you're advertising, you're going to catch everybody. But if a non-accredited comes in, you cannot then just say, well, you're not eligible for this deal because this is a 506C, but oh, by the way, I've got another deal over here. Why don't you put you in over there? That's not going to count. That's not going to fly. That'll be a violation of the rules. You would have to take the time and the effort to go through those steps and establish a substantive relationship with them. And so they would not be eligible for any current deal that you have, even if it has nothing to do with the 506 syndication that you're doing. What qualifies as a stop? We answered that already. So we would need to know, hey, Jim, so we would need to know, we want to do this ahead of time and would need to disclose in our subscription document. Yeah. So again, I recommend doing separate classes. So it's going to be very clear right from the get-go that you're going to be doing this. We actually do disclose that we may, again, we've actually had clients who had planned to do this and ended up raising all the money under 506B, so never actually did it. But we disclose in our documentation that this is our intent, that we intend to start this syndication. And if we need to pivot, we will. And we just disclose that to all the investors. One of the things we also do is we reference that in the business plan. But when you pivot, there is, even though it's substantially the same offering docs and subscription documents, they are slightly different. So it's not like we amend them, but we do add to the documentation, and especially on the business plan, that also changes quite a bit too, right? So, maybe initially your raise was, let's say $3 million, but you've raised $2 million of it. Well, now your 506C deal is only a $1 million raise. And so that starts to look a little bit different on the business plan side. And on the documentation, obviously, there's some specific language to 506C and disclosures that we want to have in 506C. But I think it makes it a little bit easier when you have those different classes, because again, your offering documents are for the sale of class A1, for example. And then when you're doing your 506C, you're specifically selling A2 shares. I should probably bring you guys in, although it would take me forever to find you guys. So that's why I'm reading them, but maybe I can, I don't know how, I'll figure this out for the next time, I promise. If you do change over from a 506B to a C and you have non-accredited investors in the deal, do you have to notify the other investors from the 506C offering of any non-accredited investors involved? Yes. I mean, that would be in the document. So again, as you guys always know from hearing me speak, the name of the game is disclosure, 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 disclosure. So we want to make sure everybody understands exactly what's going on. And so, yes, by the time you get to the 506C, 506C accredited investors will know that you've already been raising capital. They're going to know that you already have some non-accredited investors. They're going to know that they're buying class A2, and everybody before them had class A1, which, by the way, has no other differentiating factor. They have the same voting rights, same minimums. I mean, they don't have to. You could change them. You're not changing them. You could have different classes, different raise amounts, but generally speaking, they're going to be the exact same. The only difference, again, it's just for purposes of making it crystal clear that when we were doing a B, we were selling A1, and when we were doing a C, we were doing an A2, so that we don't have any confusion. So yes, everybody would know everything. Bs would know that Cs are coming in, and Cs would know that Bs are already in. Ahmad likes the shirt idea. Anybody else like the shirt idea? Well, I have you guys in there, so maybe I will do a little t-shirt thing. If you declare, Andrew, if you declare up front that you're going to do a transition from a B to a C, are you required to follow through with that, or can you stop at a B? Again, I mentioned it probably right before you said that, but we have had clients that have started a 506B. We've actually created two separate classes of shares. The business plan, the offering documents specifically stated that they could, at our sole discretion, we could pivot to a 506C. And, they just ended up raising all the money. So they didn't need to go the 506C route. Or didn't want to go the 506C route. So doesn't mean that you have to do it. It just means you're going to end up with class A2 that is completely empty. I guess theoretically you can amend everything and get rid of that class, but we just kept it in. And so now they have all the investors in class A1 and 0 investors in class A2. But yeah, absolutely. You can definitely intend to do a B and then decide not to do it later. Kyle. Great. I got my water and forgot to bring it up. For the different offerings, 506B versus 506C, how much do you need to disclose? I'm not even going to read the rest of the question. All of it. You want to disclose all of it. How much do you need to disclose to the investor about the investment? Example, if terms for a fund produce a fixed return, but the issuer makes significantly more than the terms of the investment, do you need to disclose that? Say the terms offer a 20% return. Let's get back to that, Kyle, because I don't think this is specifically to the B to C. And I want to answer the B to C questions first, but the answer is always disclose. So especially when it has to do with compensation or things. So Kyle, I'll make a note here, but Kyle, I'll get back to you on that one because I want to get through the Bs first because I want to respect everyone's time too. And is the limit to advertising for the deal, i.e. 123 Main Street, or also for your company? Also, is the limit to advertising for the deal? Not quite following. I mean, and I'm not sure what you talk about the limit to advertising. Jake, give me a follow up on that. I'm not quite following you, buddy. And why don't you follow up with that, and I'll get you to once I keep scrolling down here. How would this affect the cost of setting up the fund? It's a little bit more expensive. Even though technically it's two offers, we obviously don't charge double the price, even though I'd like to. But there is some additional work, right? So we're gonna have to update the business plan, or you guys are gonna update the business plan. We want to review it, so we're gonna do our usual deep dive into the business plan, making sure that's okay, and then we are gonna revise. Let's use that word. Revise the offering doc, specifically the PPM. Just to make sure that we've got, not to make sure, but to have all the information regarding the 506C offering. So there is going to be some additional work, but it's not significant. It's probably another 20% or something that's going to get added to that. And again, that's just our firm. Who knows what everybody else is doing, or maybe it's a flat fee, but that's the way we do it. We just charge, I think it's another 20%. Hey, Tony, to clarify what constitutes advertising can, all right, let's, Tony, I'm going to get to that. Great question, how to clarify, because there's absolutely no real definition, but I'll get to that in a second. Thanks, Cornelius. You'll be my co-host. We hired a director of customer obsession, but she's on the East Coast and she's got little kids. I'm like, probably had her do it. Maybe I'll just have Bethany do it. Tony, how do we write our PPM, specifically the number of shares per classes units we know when we pivot and how much we have allocated for each? I don't remember the specifics how we do that, but yeah, you're obviously not going to know at the beginning how many Class A1 members and how many Class A2 members, but it's not that difficult to to account for that. Obviously, you're not going to know that until the end, and when you have all your investors in, and you have that exhibit that has all of the members and their capital contributions and their percentage ownership. But that you're just going to keep raising until you cut it. Remember, it would only really affect, the only time it would affect that, which we actually haven't done, I don't necessarily recommend doing it, is if you were treating the classes differently, right? So if class A1, which is your 506B, for some reason was getting a different return, or something was different than a 506C, and then you had to bring out your calculator and figure out, well, what percentage owns this? And remember, everything is identical. So if this is an 80-20 split, for example, it really shouldn't matter. And I'm going off the top of my head, so forgive me, but it really shouldn't matter if your investors are 80%, how much of them are A and how much of them are B, because they're all getting proportionate to what they have. Now, if class A1 is getting a 7% return pref and the A2s are getting a 10% pref, then that would be an issue, or if they're charging more money. But if everybody's identical, the only difference is really, and again, it's not a legal requirement. I just think it's just something that makes sense for us to show, so that's very easy to prove when you're posting on social media or sending out an email about your 506C offerings. We can specifically say we are offering class A2 units of this particular investment, but everything else is going to be identical. So it really shouldn't affect any of that stuff. Jeff, here we go. All right, Jeff, I'll get to that in a second since it's a fun one. I want to make sure there's no other questions about this, and then I'll answer everything else here. Ryan, besides keeping separate classes and having a document that closes the 506B and initiates the 506C, do we need to document anything else? Substantial relationships, when or how we will advertise for the C, or anything else? So you have to just do it like you would always do. So on the 506B, you're going to document just like you would do any 506B. So you're going to have to document that you have a pre-existing substantive relationship. And if you met him at a random event, you're going to go through all those 7 or 8 steps that we've talked about before under the Citizen VC no action letter, getting on a phone call, sending him a questionnaire, all those things that we want to do. And then you're going to document everything. That's the key, is to make sure we document. So when you're doing the 506B, we want to comply just like you were doing any syndication. And then with 506C, obviously, same thing. We want to make sure we're only taking accreditors. We need to verify them. I would not rely on myself, or obviously an attorney, I can't, but if I'm the syndicator, I would want to shift the burden and the liability away from the syndicator and put it on a CPA, put it on a lawyer, put it on a verification company. You don't want to be messing around with that. So you would comply fully with 506C. There's nothing that changes from any of this. All we're saying is that when you do these two, one after the other, the SEC is not going to integrate them, but everything else is going to be identical from your processes and procedures in establishing the substantive relationships and also verifying the 506Cs. And don't forget, with the 506C, I'll just deviate real quick. One of my pet peeves with 506Cs is that, yes, you're allowed to advertise, but it doesn't mean you can go do whatever you want. There's still always what we call the anti-fraud provisions, as you guys will remember. So you still got to make sure that whatever statements you're posting on social media or you're blasting out in emails are not misleading. And so sometimes if you're on Twitter, it's very difficult to put all your disclaimer languages in there. But so you want to be very careful about the promises you're making. Ideally you want to do a little blurb and send them to a landing page or your website or something that does have all the disclaimers in there, that this is a 506C and the risks and you need a PPM and all that stuff. I was happy to see, and I've shared it before, but hit me up if you want to see it. But Grant Cardone, who's doing 506C deals, now has a big, fat, long disclaimer on his social media posts on Facebook, which I was shocked to see, happy to see, but just be careful with the anti-fraud provision. But to get back to your question, Ryan, it's as if we're doing a B or a C separately. We want to make sure we're complying with all those rules themselves. This may be a question for the next fun session. Jose, I'll skip this one, but no, let's do it here. If you want to stick around, let me just get through all the BC questions, and I'll go back up and do everything else, because I want to answer everyone's question. Thanks, Kyle. Mark, this seems to work great with a late hold additional raise, confirming we could raise the acquisition funds via 506B and then do a late term pref equity for future TILCs as a 506C and advertise for that piece. This seems to work great with a late hold Additional raise, meaning you're kind of short on the raise and you want to bring in a private equity group or something or some.
No,
great.
actually.
Nice. Hey, nice.
Hey,
Hey.
sorry.
I should
Thank you.
wait a minute. I should have done that the whole time. I should just said, just unmute yourself. And oh my God, I'm such a rookie at this. Oh my goodness.
So,
All right, go ahead, Mark.
you know what? Actually, you threw a little bit of monkey wrench, but basically, the pref equity it's more like a debt style, a debt coupon that's going on. So it'll be a third portion. So basically, do our normal raise to buy the property, the initial capex, all that stuff, down payment. We close on the property, and then because it's an office, we have tenants that we have rollover tenants that come up. So we have to fund those tenant improvements and leasing commissions in the future. So doing an additional raise late term to raise those funds, say an additional $1 million or $1.3 million, something like that. But it wouldn't be, this is where the monkey wrench comes in. It wouldn't be identical to the initial raise in terms of structure. It would be a coupon clipper. So say an 11% straight debt coupon.
So great question. I'm gonna mute everyone here. Great question. So yeah, that's a little bit different, right? But same thing, you would have to disclose that coupon clipping thing ahead of time, right? Because again, it disclose. So if you started your offering and there's no reference to these coupon clippings in your original offering docs, then what would need to happen, I know if it's already happened quite a bit, it may be impractical, but generally speaking, when you have a material change like that, you'd have to go back to all your investors and basically do what we call the material change letter and just letting them know, hey, things have changed. It's a material change. If you want out, let me know. We'll get you your money back plus interest. So it's not something we really want to do. But yeah, if it's, you could probably rely on it used to be 6 months. I don't think I mentioned this, but the 6 month safe harbor window got shrank to 30 days. So now, if you have two offerings that are 30 days apart, they're not going to integrate them as well. Now, the 506, I assume that subsequent raise is a 506C, because if it's a B, they do limit you to 35 non-accredited investors for every 90-day period, because otherwise people are thinking every month I'm going to do a 506B, and I'm going to do, all of, I'm going to do two 506Bs every month, and I'm going to get like 200 non-accredited investors. So they did limit you to 35 non-accredited investors for any 90-day period. But in your case, it sounds like it's just a completely part two of your offering. The other thing I would be concerned about if you're taking non-accrediteds in that subsequent thing, which probably you're not, but if you are, people forget that audited financials for non-accredited investors is part of the Reg D rule. And most of the time it's not an issue because you're starting brand new. It's a brand new entity. There are no financials, let alone audited financials. But in your case, if you wait a year later, well, now your company's been operating for the last 6 months or a year or something. So any investor may if I was an investor back then, I may even require just financials generally. But if that investor is not accredited, you may have an obligation to provide them with audited financials. So that's another consideration. But if they're accredited, then you don't have to worry about that. But that sounds like just another part B of an offering. And as long as that's disclosed on the front end, again, this doesn't have to be the exact same offering. This is just, it's just a way that the SEC is telling us that they're not going to combine those two offerings if we start with a B to go to a C. But if you want to wait 6 months to do it or do a completely different offering, as long as we're disclosing everything on the front end, you should be fine. Thank you, my friend. I like that. I should just ask people to unmute. Let's see. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Thanks, Sharon. Hey, Masood. Is there... I'll answer that in a second, Masood, because I think we're getting to the end of the 506B to C questions. If the deal is small, this is kind of part two. If the deal is small and there is enough money with the 506B investors, do we still need to convert to a 506C before closing? No, there's no obligation to convert. You're just telling investors that you as the manager reserve the right to pivot and do a 506C. You're not obligated to do so. And in fact, we've got at least one client that was able to raise the entire, and it wasn't a small raise, they just raised the entire amount on the B side. Thanks, Ryan. Amy, thanks for saying, appreciate it. All right. Woo. Hey, appreciate you guys still being on here. I'm going to go back and start. And there was about 3 or 4 that were just general questions, which I also love. So I'm going to go through those now. And if you've got any general questions.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, John, how you doing?
So it seems to me that the only reason you're going to be making this pivot is if you don't get your initial raise. And you have to broaden your scope, broaden your search. If you fulfill your raise right off the bat, there's no need for this whole mechanism.
No, there's not. And again, it's not for everyone. It's not like I'm not saying that every single person should go out there and do this because it's not applicable to everyone. What I'm saying is that if you have that scenario, and I come across it quite a bit where syndicators are torn, right? They're not sure. They'd love to do a 506B, but they also know that they have a bunch of non-accredited investors in their database, and prior investors or just people they know. They just don't think they can raise the entire amount in there. Well, now this is an option. Maybe you start the 506B, get all those people in there, and then you pivot, but you got to let everybody know that. Jeff, do you want to ask a question? I'm going to.
Yeah, I do,
sorry.
because
Yeah.
it is to this conversion. If you started out at a 506B and then you go to the 506C, you do your advertising. Now you've got all of these people in that same entity, but we're talking fund to fund. We want to invest in a 506C. We're not going to be able to do that because now we have non-accredited investors in the deal. It's unless we have 5 million under management, and then the entity would be a 506C, or the entity would be accredited.
Yeah, 100%.
Am I correct?
No, you're 100%. So you're talking a little bit different. So we haven't really talked about fund of funds, but I'm happy to do it. So yeah, in your scenario, if you're doing a fund of funds where you're raising capital into your fund with the intent to, place that capital in somebody else's deal, which has its own, hair on it.
Which is a 506. They're 506C.
Yeah. So if that's a 506C, you could absolutely do what I'm saying at the 506C level. But as you mentioned, your challenge is if you're now investing in deals that only allow accredited investors, your fund is a non-accredited investor unless it's got $5 million in assets in assets, because it has non-accredited investors in it. So you're absolutely correct. That doesn't solve. That's an issue for you. It doesn't solve that problem for you, because at the end of the day, you're going to end up with an LLC that has X number of non-accrediteds, making your LLC a non-accredited investor. And so there's two issues actually, Jeff. The first issue is if you're investing in it, if your fund is investing in somebody else's fund that's limited to it could be a 506B. If they're limiting it to accrediteds only, no, you're not eligible. And number two, and I just lost my train of thought. But number two is even if they are accepting 506Bs, there's a look-through provision, right? So every single one of your non-accredited investors is going to count against the 35 of the original fund. So if you're coming in with a huge fund that has 30 non-accredited investors, well, that's already 30, even though it's just one investor, one fund, it's going to count towards the underlying syndicator's 35 limit.
Right.
So, yeah. But yeah,
Right.
It doesn't solve that problem, my friend.
Nope. That I'm, as a lot of other people, I'm just trying to find a place for some of these non-accredited investors that are on my list, as you were saying, trying to find a place for them.
Not just kind of a random thought, but last week, on Thursday of last week, the SEC got together to talk a little bit more about accredited investor and expanding that definition. If you remember last year, I think it was, or actually it was 2 years ago, but I think it became final last year. They wanted to expand, because I know you're trying to help non-accredited. So there's a lot of non-accrediteds that could start a certification program and go take a test or something and actually become accredited and be eligible for your deals. That hasn't gone anywhere. They were telling us they were going to come out with programs and certifications, and it's kind of stalled like everything else. But they did not revamp it, but it's on their agenda for the next 6 months. And they actually had a meeting. It's like an all-day meeting, actually, discussing this. And so I think they're going to open it up for comments again, but there's going to be a little bit of movement here in the next, let's say, 6 months on potentially having this, a couple of these programs pop up that you can then get certified to become an accredited. So I know that's not directly solves your problem, but at least it helps a little bit if they can get their act together and come up with a certification program.
Well, it doesn't help me get my grandkids into deals.
It doesn't help you get into the deal
because they're not going out for any certification.
Do you know, and this is, I guess this is the dangers of doing a live event. Although I think I know most of the stuff by the back of my head. There's oh man, hopefully this doesn't come back to burn me, Jeff. I'm going to blame you if it burns me, but maybe we could talk about it offline. But there's a rule that, it's not a rule. It's actually, I think, just rule 502, or maybe it's actually in the definition of, I don't remember exactly where it is, but essentially saying that if somebody lives in the household of an accredited investor, like they're a minor, then they will it's not technically an accredited investor, but that would not count against your number. So if you try to get your grandkids in, your grandkids presumably live with your kids, And so if your kids are accredited and those grandkids live in the household of your kids, they would be eligible for whatever investment you're coming through. Man, I hope that doesn't come back to bite me, but I'm 99% sure that's true. So if you want,
I'd be very interested in that, because I invested some money in some deals for them in a 506B, and they're making some profit, and we would like to reinvest it. But most of the stuff I'm doing right now are 506Cs. So that gives
I'll
me,
send it over to you. What I know that rule's out there. What I don't know is whether let's say it's your son, right? Do you mind if I ask if it's son or daughter? Is it your son or daughter's kids, or?
Well, I've got both. I've got
okay.
my son and my two daughters.
Got it. So if your son, what I don't know is if your son is accredited, right? Yeah. Does your son have to be an investor in the deal for everybody else to qualify to be an eligible deal, or just the fact that they live in their household, they're going to be considered sort of accredited? That's the part I don't know. But a simple solution there is just make sure your son's also invested, and then 99.9%. I'm going to email it to you, Jeff, because I know I've got your email. So I'll shoot you an email with that particular rule.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see here. Let's keep going here then. Appreciate you guys sticking around. All right. Cornelius wants a t-shirt.
Hey, Mauricio, I'll just jump in while you.
There you go. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Rob. Yeah, you know what?
At
this point, you guys can just start jumping in. I think we're getting lower and lower on the questions. So
sure. I just wanted to say we're in the midst of one of these right now with your group, and just found out about it through the interview process that it was an option. Decided to exercise that. Paid a little bit of extra fee. $6.5 million raise. I'm happy to, just in case we ran out of gas before getting to the finish line of that raise. Nice to have that second parachute. And quite honestly, I'm happy to say we haven't needed to. We're almost to the finish line of the raise. But boy, I got to tell you, having that ace of spades not shown yet as a card in your back pocket sure has been just a breath of fresh air.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I guess now I can officially say that I know at least two of our clients who have had the scenario where they haven't had to, although you're not done yet. So maybe you will have to pull that.
Right. Talk is cheap, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
When you get to the finish line, it's all talk.
Appreciate it, Rob. Hey, if you got a question, just unmute yourself and we'll answer it.
Hey, Mauricio, I'll clarify my question about
hey, Jake,
advertising.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm going back to kindergarten here, but my understanding, and correct me where I'm misspeaking here, on the 506C, I can advertise on social media, etc. But I can say 123 North Main Street, but I can only advertise to accredited investors.
Well, you can't control who you end up targeting, right? So if you're on social media or you do a radio ad, you're going to catch non-accredited. Right. You can't accept any non-accredited, and you must verify your accredited before they get in. But it's a wide net. I mean, only 20% of people are accredited. So anyways, didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah. But yes, you are going to catch other people, and you just can't put them in another 506B deal is what, you can't use that as an end around or a back end to get them into your deals. But if you legitimately were doing a 506C and this person just happened to reach out to you and said, hey, I'd love to go, but I'm not accredited, you would just apologize. Look, would love to help you, and you're not eligible for this deal, but let's take the time to spend the next X amount of months to get to know each other and establish a substantive relationship. And then once that day gets justified that on June 1st, I established a substantive relationship with Mauricio, now he can be eligible for future offerings because he still has to have a pre-existing substantive relationship, which means pre-existing the offering. So you got to go through the process. But at that point, it wouldn't be inappropriate unless there's just some scheme that you're putting together where you're kind of trying to do this over here with the intent of just kind of going around the rules. But if you're going to capture non-accredited in any 506C when you're posting like that.
Right. And so prior to the conversion from the B to the C, for the B, can you advertise your company, but not a specific deal? So for example, capital, can I say, here's what I do?
Theoretically, yeah. I mean, I think you're playing with fire. I mean, that just goes back in general when you're doing a 506B. It goes back to which is probably going to be not next week, but the week after is probably going to be a topic on social media advertising and what can and cannot do. So I'll give you the 30-second version. But generally speaking, if you've heard me speak before, my advice is to stay off of social media when you have an active deal. right? That's not the time for you to play cuteness about, is this an accurate post or not? So if you're actively raising capital, I generally recommend staying off of social media. Yes, you could post about your cats and your dogs and your family and your kids and all that fun stuff, but try not to get cute with it. In between deals, when you don't have a deal going, then I think you have an opportunity to use social media. First of all, what you said is always, you're always allowed to talk about facts and information about your business and, what you do and, about resume, right? Not the most exciting stuff, but theoretically that's good. What you want to keep in mind though, I'm not going to draw it out, but if you're going to do that, by the way, if you're going to be putting out content about your business and what you do, or I see a lot of posts about updates on, hey, this is our property that we bought 6 months ago and we've renovated the pool. And so let me show you how awesome our pool job, all that kind of stuff. Just make sure that you're consistent with that, right? What you don't want to see is you're posting nothing. Where's the camera down here? You're posting nothing. And then suddenly you have a deal, and then suddenly those posts go through the roof and you're actively posting about your company and all. And then once you're done with the raise, it goes back down to zero, right? That's going to seem fishy. Now, if you're consistent, you can always talk about facts and information about you and your business. What I recommend doing is doing value add, right? There's nothing wrong with you posting an article on why real estate is the greatest asset class of all time, or why Florida is the greatest market out there, or just stuff that adds value. Or why do you think people do podcasts, right? People do podcasts, they don't advertise the deals, but it's a way to get audiences. So that's the way you really, at the end of the day, to give you the punchline, is how you use social media. But no, I would not get too cute about it. I see too many people, because remember, it's not just offers, it's conditioning the market stuff, which is so super vague, and who knows what that means really. But anything that you post that theoretically gets people excited about your deal, even though you're not talking about it specifically, is potentially conditioning the market. My favorite one is, here's a good example of two different ways of approaching the same problem that I think have vastly different things. The due diligence trip, right? People make videos on their due diligence trips, and most people they can't help themselves. Like, oh, we're here touring our 200 unit, we're doing our due diligence or whatever, and oh, it's a great, and then it's like, it's a great asset class, and we're really going to crush it for our investors. Or if you're interested in whatever, they just can't help themselves. A better one would be, forget about all that stuff. Here are the 5 things that I look for in a due diligence trip, and then you're doing a video on 5 tips or a checklist to do it. And you're actually adding value of what do you do at a due diligence trip. And you're going in the first thing I look at is looking at whatever, the counters or this, or the washer and dryer hookups, or, whatever it is that you feel, and you can do a checklist and then deliver that as actual value add content. You're not talking about your deal. You're not talking about the fact that you're there for an active deal, that that you have investors or anything like that, but producing content like that. Preferably, I would actually produce that content or distribute that content after you're closed with your offering. That way you eliminate that issue. But that's the type of content that I would be putting out in terms of trying to use social media to get people you don't know. And then when you get those people through a lead magnet or on LinkedIn or YouTube, however you're meeting on meetups like this, then what you want to do is, again, you don't know this person from Adam. So you got to take those steps. How do you take somebody that you don't know, you just met? How do you establish and take them to the point where you have a substantive relationship? And that's the 8 steps that I keep talking about all the time. And those are the Citizen VC. And if you don't have it, I've got, I don't want to, this is not meant to be a pitch thing, but I've got an ebook that I'm happy to share with you that's got those 8 steps. It's called what's it called? The 5 things every syndicator must know to stay out of jail. So that's got one of those chapters has to do about establishing substantive relationships. So I'm happy to share that if you want to just shoot me an email or something. All right, thanks. Who's next? Oh, sorry, I muted you again. Thanks. Hey, Shanika, how
Mauricio,
are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. I want to get clarification on something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Right now I'm doing 2 capital raises. One is a $4 million raise, and we're closing on April 4th. The other one is a $14 million raise that we're closing in June. I want you to clarify what you said about, like, if I get someone that comes in on the $4 million deal and says, no, I cannot solicit them on the $14 million deal.
So
Technically.
you've got 2. So you got one that's a 4 million and the other one is how much?
14 million.
So one's a 4 and they're both, one's a 506B, one's a 506C.
We were thinking of doing a 506B on the 4 million because we have a strong base, but we're not confident about if we can get the whole 4 million in just the next 5 weeks.
And then what about
So,
what about the 14 million? Is that going on at the same
accredited.
time? And that's a 506c?
Yeah, that's,
So,
that one
so-
closes in the end of June.
yeah, so you can definitely do what we call concurrent raises. So there's nothing wrong with having two different projects and raising two different things. Again, you just got to be very cognizant and very clear that when you're doing your that $4 million raise, there's no advertising on that one, right? Those you're going to your pre-existing substantive relationship list and you're talking to those people and you're raising the money into the 506b. And then for the 14 million, you can go do whatever you want on social media and advertise and do it. Again, anti-fraud provisions thing. What you cannot do is if somebody comes into the C that's non-accredited, which I think is where you're going. If you capture somebody under the somebody sees a post about your $14 million raise under the 506c, you can't tell them, oh, well, I'm sorry, this is a 506c only, but oh, by the way, I got this $4 million deal over here, go in here. That you cannot do. Absolutely not. You can keep their information and then go through the process of getting to know them over the next couple of months. And so that maybe the next deal in 6 months or whatnot, they might be eligible for, but you definitely do not want to be mixing and matching. On the flip side, which I know you don't want to do, you could do the other way around. If you have somebody who's a 506b, you have a pre-existing relationship with you and they reach out to you and for whatever reason, like, yeah, I need to invest in something. I don't really like this $4 million deal. You could then say, well, I got this $14 million deal, which is a 506c. Do you want to go in there? And if they like that, you could put them in there, but you can't go from a C to a B, only a B to a C. I'm sorry, only a B to a C, not a C to a B.
Okay, got it. And do you think there's enough window of time if we decided to convert 506B to a 506C within a 5-week window for the 4 million raise, or is that really tight?
I would if you haven't talked, here's what if you haven't talked about it already and you're disclosed it on your offering docs on the 506.
Yeah, we haven't started the capital raise.
Oh,
We're going to start it next week.
Yeah, so
on Monday.
So if you want to have that option, I would recommend disclosing it on the front and having different classes and having that option of if you're short, then you can go ahead and pivot to the 506b. Pivot to the 506c pursuant to this rule.
So there's no like definitive time, like I need a week to make the transfer.
No. I mean, it's just, we're pretty fast on drafting docs, but no, there's no magic timeline. It's not like you have to do it within a certain amount of time, or it's just up to you is when you feel like, obviously you have a short time window, right? So if you've got 5 weeks to close the whole thing, you got to do it quickly, right? You got to start. That's probably the one thing I didn't mention that I would probably recommend too, is you want to start, if you're going to think about doing this, you want to start early. You don't want to wait till due diligence is over to then start calling the attorney and saying, we want to start doing the stuff. You want to start doing this earlier than usual because you want to hit the road on day one, as soon as it's under contract, as soon as you know for sure you've got the property, because it doesn't take that much time to do the updated docs, but it does take time to raise money. And so, but there's no magic formula. It's just going to be really up to you.
Yeah, we had drafted it out. We even have the underwriting with split shares on there. And it's just coincidental or God's work why I saw your post yesterday. I'm like, oh, maybe I should look at that option. So thank you very much for today.
No, my pleasure. I appreciate you guys joining and more importantly, still sticking around. I know for some of you it's late out there, so I appreciate it. Just unmute yourselves at this point. This is probably working better than me reading. Let me just see if there's somebody. I have to get off. Tammy, thanks, Tammy.
Mauricio, this is Danny.
I don't look good in orange. Hey, Danny, how you doing?
Good. Hey, I'm a beginner, and I got a question. As I start to get offers to become a GP on a team, is it okay to be brought in late to a deal? Like, how late is considered okay? Like, let's say post PSA. I've been told by my mentor to try to avoid coming in late. Can you just expand on that?
What are you being brought in to do?
Let's just say, I get multiple offers to come in, raise capital, post PSA, and they're looking for additional capital raisers, and then they can bring me on as an additional asset manager as well.
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge, right? So you
right.
First of all, I don't even like the term. I would avoid using the term capital raiser at all cost. And
okay.
One of the things that I brought up at some meeting is just get it out of your vocabulary, to be honest with you, because here's the issue. People forget that all the communications that happen between the co-sponsors, right? All the emails, all the negotiations. I mean, just think back about all those communications you've had with those people. And there's emails that have gone back and forth. Hey, how much can you raise? You can come in if I can raise this much. Like all those email communications, all those spreadsheets that I've seen that have a little cell for capital raiser, 10%, 50%. None of that is privileged, right? So if this, again, wet blanket alert, right? If this were to happen, something were to happen down the road and regulators were brought in and then they're doing an audit and they're digging deep, those emails are not going to be protected. Those spreadsheets are going to be protected. So when you try and claim, hey, I was not brought in to raise capital, but there's all these emails going back and forth where you guys are negotiating that. So you got to be super careful. It doesn't matter when you're brought in. You can never be brought in to just raise capital. As you mentioned, you're going to be doing something on the asset management side. So that will definitely help you. The rule is you must be doing what we call substantial duties. And then the question is just going to be whether that asset management role is sufficient. Just depends on how involved you are. But the bottom line is that you're getting compensated for that substantial duty, that asset management, not for bringing in the capital. And so one of the challenges by being brought in late into the game is that they've already done the underwriting. They've already looked at the market. They've already done the due diligence. They've done all this work. Maybe not. I mean, you said PSA, but the later you come in, the less chance there is for you to actually do substantial duties, because the whole idea is you're a legitimate co-sponsor. You're coming to help out. Well, if they've done all the work already and done all the, hey, what are you doing? Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, if you get brought in and you're a killer asset manager and if you're boots on the ground, for example, right? Let's just say that they're experienced syndicators, but you're in, I'm making this up, you're in Orlando, Florida, and they just happen to have an asset in Orlando, Florida, but they don't know the market well, or you're right there. And so you're boots on the ground. So you can go visit the property, go meet with the property manager. You can actually, then yes, you're, I think, clearly involved in substantial duties, but you want to be super careful with being brought in. I know it happens all the time. I mean, I'm not here to say it doesn't happen, but there's a reason why the SEC has been cracking down on that. And my concern is just, we've had a good run, right? It's been, what has it been, 13 years that we haven't really had much of a hiccup. Maybe COVID was a temporary one, but when things start going south, when investors start complaining, when audits start happening again, it's not going to be a good thing if you're not only are you not doing substantial duties, but that you're not able to prove. Because saying that you did substantial duties, that it's in some contract, doesn't matter. It actually you actually have to prove that you were doing the stuff. I'm going to give a shout out to Merrill. I don't know if he's probably not here, but if Merrill ever sees Merrill Calliser, who's a friendly competitor of mine, a great guy out in Dallas, he recommends that you put together an MOU, a memorandum of understanding between you and all your co-sponsors prior to PSA, so that you outline.
How typical is that? Seeing MOU.
I've seen it. I've actually seen, I had a client who did a joint venture agreement. So it was actually a full-on JV agreement, but it's not common at all. What happens, what I prefer to do, and again, there's only so much I could do, but what I would prefer to do is when we create, generally we're creating an operating agreement for the management company, like the new GP entity, that I would love to have that signed, sealed, and delivered before any money gets raised, right? Because that's even better than an MOU, but a lot of times people don't want to sign it because they want to wait to see how much money everybody's going to raise and then, give the percentages at the end, right? But that's even better, right? So MOU is a good thing, but it's just something that you have in your back pocket. So when somebody says, well, no, you were brought in to raise capital and you got this percentage based on the amount of money you raised, you can have a document that says, no, I'd probably have it notarized. No, here's a document that we have, that everybody signed prior to all of the stuff going on, that we all agreed that this is what I was going to do, this is what he was going to do, this is what she was going to do, and this is what our percentage is going to be, irrespective of how much money we raised. Because some of it's egregious. Some of it is literally, you come in and raise 500 grand, I will give you 5% of the GP, but if you raise $1 million, I'll give you a 10% of the GP, and so on and so forth. And that's what we call transaction-based compensation, which is the hallmark of broker-dealer activity. So there's a lot of unlicensed broker-dealers running around there, and it's become an issue. I thought we had to wait for some downturn, but it happened pre-COVID, and the SEC is aware of it.
Great, thank you for.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Danny. Appreciate it.
Hey, Mauricio, I have a question for you.
Yep. Hey, Jeff,
thanks
how you
for
doing?
doing that. Hey, I'm good. How you doing?
Good, man.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. This is a super fascinating conversation.
Well,
And
I'm shocked that people are interested. So I'm shocked that 35 people are still on here, and but I'm appreciative and looking forward to doing these every week. So
yeah, this is great. So me and my partner, we're early in the game. We don't have a property identified yet, and we haven't gone out to start raising capital yet. So at this point, we don't have a specific investment property or an offering identified. Is now a good time to start looping people into that 506B group, or do I need to wait until I have an actual offering or investment identified and to present to them?
no, this is exactly, look, raising capital and adding to your network is an ongoing process. It's not a, hey, I found a deal, let me go find the money. You should be constantly looking for people and entering the relationships and fostering those relationships.
Yep.
And the best time to do that is when you don't have a deal. First of all, it's just easier to talk to people when you don't have a deal because they know you're not going to ask them for money. So you're just asking them. You know, we've been talking a lot on LinkedIn, and if you guys aren't on LinkedIn, I highly recommend it. There's a lot of great syndicators on there as well. But there's a lot of talk about, you know, it's not about what you want, it's what the investor needs, and the only way you can figure that out is to talk to them. So, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Investor, what are you looking for? Are you looking for cash flow? Are you looking for this? Are you looking for mobile home parks? And then say, okay, great, I understand what you need or are looking for. If I were to find a deal like that, is it okay if I email you some information? I mean, what are they going to say? No, don't email me. Of course, yeah, here's my email. I'd be happy to take a look at it, right? And then you want to continue to talk to your list and talk to those people, not wait 2 years and then suddenly the first time they've heard from you, you've had a deal. That's probably the worst time to do it. One of my favorite stories that I heard was emailing your list with deals that you were passing on. So you would say, hey, here's the deal that we looked at today or yesterday, and this is the reason we didn't like it. It was overpriced. There was not enough this, there was not, and they literally, that was the email, was an update. So they would send periodically those emails so that finally when they did have a deal, clearly it wasn't the first deal that came across their desk. They'd gone through hundreds of deals and they've been updating their list. But the point is that you don't want them to hear from you the first time when you have, like I actually felt a little guilty today. In all honesty, when I don't know how many of you guys found this on when I sent an email. I haven't sent an email I have a pretty decent database. I haven't sent an email in like 2 years. And here I was, the first email, kind of not pitching, but I was offering this thing. You want to keep talking. You want to be providing value to your email things constantly. You know, I'm not saying every day or once a week, but yes. So the short answer to your question is absolutely. You want to talk to people ideally before you have an offering. It's much harder to be accused of making an offer if you don't have a deal. It's not impossible because again, you can condition the market. So you could brag about, oh yeah, like you should invest with me. I usually get 20% returns to my investors. I mean, that would be conditioning the market for a future deal, but it's much harder to do if you don't have an active deal.
Great. That helps a ton. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good seeing you.
Good seeing you.
Anyone else? Or let me just go down here in case somebody left because I don't even know what's a good time. I think that I'll give it a few more seconds here. If not, one more down here real quick. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Hey guys, look, first one, super appreciative for you guys being here. Next week, same time, same bat channel, we'll do funds. And if you've already registered, you don't have to re-register. I think you're registered. Feel free to unregister, obviously, but we'll be doing this again, same time, same bat channel. We're gonna talk about funds and fund of funds, and then open it up to Q&A. I mean, again, it's gonna be a 5-10 minute spiel. And then any questions you guys have, let me know, and looking forward to helping and adding value however I can. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.